Hello, my name is Carrie Brown and I am with the Central Mississippi Regional Library System. Today I'm going to be reading to you chapters 7, 8, and 9 of Calendar Mysteries April Adventure. Written by Ron Roy, illustrated by John Stephen Gurney, published by Random House, New York. Chapter 7, Swan's Surprise. "What are you guys looking at?" Brian asked. He and Lucy were standing behind Nate. "Snake!" Nate said, pointing. "It's a giant man-eating python." "No, it isn't," Bradley said. "It's just a big water snake." "Very big," Brian said. "Snakes are shy," Lucy said. "I bet it's more afraid of us than we are of it." "It couldn't be more afraid than I am," Nate insisted. "It's so beautiful," Lucy said. "Look how shiny its scales are." Pal lowered his nose to sniff the snake. The snake uncurled its long body and started to crawl away. "What's the matter with its belly?" Brian asked. "It's got a big bump." "I think it just ate something," Bradley said. The kids watched as the snake disappeared in the tall weeds. "What if it ate one of our eggs?" Nate said. "That bump in its belly looks like an egg." "I saw a snake on TV that swallowed an egg whole," Lucy told the boys. "How do they crack them open?" Brian asked. "I think their stomach muscles crack the egg once it's inside," Lucy said. "Ooh, gross," Nate said. "Guys, we don't know if that snake ate our egg," Bradley said. "That lump in its belly could be a frog or something." "And we don't know if the raccoons did either," Brian said. "So what do we do?" "Keep looking for the eggshells," Lucy suggested. "If we find them, at least we'll know something ate our eggs." "If we bring the eggshells home, maybe we can still get the prize," Nate said. When the snake was gone, the kids kept walking. Hal was still tugging on the leash. His nose was on the ground, sniffing everything. Suddenly, two swans swam closer to the kids. They began hissing and flapping the water with their wings. "Guys, I don't think they want us here," Nate said. "I wonder why," Brian said. "I know why they're mad at us," Bradley said. "Look." He bent down and parted the grass next to the water's edge. "It's their nest." The nest was as big around as a tire. It was made of 3 layers. The bottom layer was twigs and small branches. On top of the branches was a thick layer of grass. The grass was lined with soft swan feathers. "Oh my goodness," Lucy said, pointing at the nest. In the middle of the feathers lay 4 golden eggs. Chapter 8. Lucy's Brilliant Idea. "We found them," Nate said. "We get the treasure." "Well, the swans really found them first," Bradley said. "Guys, let's move away from the pond," Lucy said. "The swans think we're going to steal the eggs." The kids and Pal walked over to the bandshell and sat. Pal flopped on the ground with his head on his front paws. "So what should we do?" asked Brian. "I want the prize." "I feel sorry for the swans," Lucy said. "Why?" asked Nate. "Because I think something stole their eggs," Lucy said. "Maybe it was the raccoons or that snake, but now they don't have any eggs to hatch. That must be why they took ours." "Yeah, the swans think the eggs will hatch," Bradley said, "but they won't because they're hard-boiled." "That's a bummer," Nate said. "The swans will keep waiting and waiting, but nothing will happen." "I have an idea," Bradley said. "Let's get them another swan egg, one that will hatch." "Where do we get one?" Bradley asked. Bradley stood up and Pal jumped to his feet. "There are swans at the petting zoo," Bradley said. "Maybe they have eggs." "Cool," Nate said, "and we know someone who works there." 5 minutes later, the kids and Pal walked through the petting zoo gate. They stopped to pet a baby goat. Then they found the office and went inside. "Well, hi, gang," said a smiling man with gray hair. He was sitting at a desk typing on a computer. It was Mr. Neater, who used to be the janitor at their school. The kids had helped him find a home for his pet rabbit at the petting zoo. "Hi, Mr. Neater," Bradley said. "How's Douglas?" "Ask him yourself," Mr. Neater said. "He's here on my lap." The kids walked closer. A large rabbit was sound asleep on Mr. Neater's knees. Pal whimpered and tried to lick Douglas. Bradley held the leash tightly. "Can I pet him?" Lucy asked. Mr. Neater smiled. "Douglas will be sad if you don't," he said. Lucy patted the rabbit's soft head. Douglas twitched his ears and wiggled his tail. "What brings you kids here?" Mr. Neater asked. Bradley told Mr. Neater about the golden eggs in the swan's nest. "My goodness, that is a problem," Mr. Neater said. "It's a sad thing, but a lot of wild birds lose their eggs to other animals who want to eat them." "We were wondering if the petting zoo still has swans," Bradley said. "Why, yes, we have a pair out in the barn," Mr. Neater said. Then he grinned. "Say, I'll bet I know what you're thinking. You want one of their eggs, right?" "Do they have any eggs, Mr. Neater?" Nate asked. Mr. Neater nodded. "You bet. I think they have a bunch this season." "Wow, could we get one?" Bradley asked. "Let's go talk to Tom, our swan expert," Mr. Neater said. He put Douglas on the floor and stood up. "Follow me." Mr. Neater led the kids and pal into a small barn. The first thing they saw was a mother hen and a batch of yellow baby chicks. "Over this way," Mr. Neater said. They followed him to a pen. Inside the pen, 2 swans were lying on some straw. An open door led to an outdoor area with a small pond. "The mama is the one with her head down, and there is her clutch of eggs." Bradley gasped. Up close, the swans were really big. They were as white as snow, with orange beaks and bright, shiny eyes. "Hi, Mr. Neater," a voice said. A young man walked over to the pen. He was wearing a dark green sweatshirt with the petting zoo patch on one sleeve. "Hi, Tom," Mr. Neater said. He introduced the kids and pal. Then he told Tom about the swans in the park. "My young friends here are hoping your swans won't mind giving one of their eggs," Mr. Neater said. "I'm sure they won't mind," Tom said. "In fact, they have too many eggs. They usually lay from 3 to 8, but this year we have 10. Tom entered the pen and spoke softly to the mother swan. Then he reached into the nest and pulled out 2 greenish-colored eggs. "These should hatch in about 10 days, Tom said, "but we have to put them in the new nest pretty fast." "But what if the snakes or raccoons eat them before they hatch?" Bradley asked. Tom put the eggs inside his sweatshirt pocket. "That's always a problem," he said. He looked at Mr. Neater. "Any suggestions?" The man shook his head. "I have an idea," Lucy said. They all listened as she explained. "You know, that just might work," Tom said. "I'll meet you guys out front in 5 minutes." Chapter 9. Happy Swans, Hungry Kids. While they waited, the kids played with the baby goat. He nibbled on their fingers and licked the palms of their hands. "Okay, we're all set," Tom said a few minutes later. He came back with a tall man wearing a green sweatshirt like his. "This is Luke. He's a volunteer like Mr. Neater, and he's going to help us." Luke was carrying a plastic kiddie pool. "We use this for ducklings," he said, "but it'll be perfect for your project." The 3 adults, 4 kids, and pal headed back to Center Park. "Can you take us to the swan's nest?" Tom asked. "Sure," Bradley said. He and pal led the way. "Look," Lucy whispered as they approached the nest. One of the swans was lying on the nest. The other swam in the pond nearby. "The mother is on the nest," Luke whispered. "Her mate keeps an eye on her to make sure she's safe." "That poor mother swan is trying to hatch the eggs," Mr. Neater said. "Okay, to make this work, we need to get her off the nest," Luke said. He walked toward the nest, waving the kiddie pool. The mother swan hissed at him, but she hopped off her nest and backed away. Never taking her eyes off the humans, she waded into the pond. She joined her mate and glared at the intruders. With the mother swan out of the nest, everyone could see the golden Easter eggs. Mr. Neater removed the eggs and handed them to the 4 kids. Suddenly the mother swan streaked over to the kids, hissing and snapping her beak. Luke and Tom waved their arms and she went back to the pond, but she did not look happy. "It's okay, Mama Swan," Mr. Neater said. "Pretty soon you'll have babies to keep you busy." "Ready to get wet?" Tom asked Luke and Mr. Neater. He kicked off his sneakers. "How deep is the water?" Mr. Neater asked. He was pulling off his shoes and socks. "Not very," Luke said, removing his sneakers. "I helped clean up some litter last year. I only got wet up to my knees." "Can we help?" Bradley asked. "Absolutely," Tom said. "After all, this was your idea. But first, this." Very gently, Tom took the 2 real swan eggs out of his sweatshirt pouch. He laid them in the center of the swan's nest. "Now, let's gather around the nest," Tom said. All 7 of us will lift it together and place it inside the kiddie pool." "Careful not to let the nest break apart," Mr. Neater said. On a count of 3, they picked up the nest and set it into the plastic pool. "Great," Tom said. "Now, Mr. Neater, Luke, and I will float it out to the island. I think the water is too deep for you kids." The 3 adults waded into the water. They floated the kiddie pool with the swan nest in between them. The 2 swans hissed and flapped their wings. They followed the group to the island. Bradley, Brian, Lucy, and Nate watched them lift the nest out and set it on the island rocks. Then the 3 adults came back with the kiddie pool. "This should be interesting," Tom said. He sat on the shore. "Let's watch and see what they do." The 2 swans swam up to the little island. They stretched their long necks and looked inside their nest. Then they both began grunting. "They've seen the eggs," Bradley said. It took just a few seconds for the mother swan to sit on the eggs. Her mate stayed near the nest. "I think the problem has been solved," Mr. Neater said. He grinned at the kids. "That was a great idea." "So now the raccoons and snakes won't be able to get their eggs, right?" Nate said. "That's right," Tom said. "Where the nest was before, any creature could sneak up and steal the eggs while Mama Swan was off the nest. But now, if a raccoon or snake swims to the island, the swans would see it coming and fight it off." "And trust me," Luke said, "swans are excellent fighters." They all sat on the bank and watched the swans for a while. "I can't wait to see the babies," Lucy said. "Come back in about 2 weeks," Tom said. "Baby swans are called cygnets, and they're really cute." After a while, Bradley stood up. "Well, we have our golden eggs," he said. "Let's go home and get our treasure." The kids thanked Mr. Neater, Tom, and Luke. Then they headed across the park toward Bradley and Brian's house. 5 minutes later, the 4 kids and Pal burst into the kitchen. Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose were at the table playing Monopoly. "We got them," Bradley announced. They each placed one golden egg on the table. "Yeah, now we want the treasure," Nate said, "and I hope it's not Monopoly money." "It's not money at all," Josh said. He walked over to the refrigerator. "See, I told you it's food," Bradley said. "Good, because I'm starving," Brian said. Josh opened the fridge and pulled out 4 tall chocolate Easter bunnies. "Awesome," Nate said. Right away he broke off a chocolate ear and began chewing. "So, where did you guys find the golden eggs?" Dink asked. "It's a long story," Bradley said. Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose just looked at him. "So, we're waiting," Ruth Rose said. "We fought off a giant snake," Nate said, "and a pack of hungry raccoons," Brian added. "And we had to swim in the pond," Lucy put in. The 3 older kids stared. "Is this all true?" Josh asked. Bradley licked his chocolate bunny. "Of course it's true," he said. "Will we tell a lie the day before Easter?" The end. Thank you. Goodbye.